Welcome to the Church Security Answer Man video blog, where it's all about ministry safety, security, and making a difference for people. And now, your host, a former law enforcement officer, criminal justice trainer, and security expert, Captain Joe Puckett.
What's up, everyone? I want to welcome you to our community. This is the Church Security Answer Man, and I am so happy you're joining me here today. I'm your host, Joe Puckett. And I'm glad you're taking some time to listen to such an important topic, to be part of our community here, if you will, whether you're joining us on the radio or whether you're on our podcast or our video blog. I'm so glad that you're here. Today we're discussing background checks, background screenings, how important those are as part of our security program, protecting our ministry. So I want to remind you this in this discussion, in this community, it doesn't matter what your denomination is, it doesn't matter what the size of your ministry is. It's really all about protecting our people, our buildings, and just making a safe environment for our ministry. So that's what's important here for us to talk about. Background screening, as I see, it's one of the most important steps you can take to protect your ministry from crimes such as fraud, theft, sexual misconduct, those kinds of issues. It's a tool that can be used to, really sometimes help us, I think, retain people as well. We can see things and help us get to some core folks and maybe even help us with our leadership, choosing our leadership in those different sections as well. So, and I want to remind you that my perspective is that the background checks don't catch everything. It's not a safety net for you. It's just one of those things that we can do to protect our children, protect our monies, and those things that have been put into our care. So we don't replace the two people concepts that I talk about, especially in the sensitive areas when it comes to, our children, our classrooms, our monies, those kind of things. We still need to have two people involved in those processes wherever possible. Now, I don't want you to feel bad if you're not doing a good job as we talk about background checks. But, we should be striving to have good background checks as one of our components. A recent study by Barna Research shows that you're not alone, whatever you're doing, as far as the process goes. If you don't feel like you're doing a great job, you're not alone. If you feel like you're doing a great job, you're not alone as well. So in their survey, they found 30% of churches had no screening process in place. 32% of churches in their study were trying but not consistently doing background checks. And 38% of churches had background checks in place and were consistent. So who should we be checking? Just as a brief discussion. And remember a good base background check, I think you can find one somewhere around $20 so per person. And so you got to shop around a little bit for it. You might even contact your insurance company and see who they recommend. They might even sponsor someone that will do those kind of things. So who should we be checking based on that amount? I think that we should be checking employees and volunteers, paid or volunteer positions that involve the children, the elderly, or any other vulnerable populations within your ministry, whoever that might be. You might have some special needs classes going on. And I also am not sure that people that are in recovery or those areas might not also be in vulnerable situations as well. And so I'm not a professional, I'm not a licensed professional in those areas, so I'm not claiming to be, but as we talk about background checks, those folks can be very vulnerable at times, and so to who's working around them. So I think that might be important. People who are dealing with money, transportation, if they're driving people around for your ministry purposes, then I think that those people should be screened prior to any position is offered to them. And I do see where we can save money is just screen the finalists. If you're doing an employment offering or you're looking for volunteers and you're fortunate to get a pool of people trying to get those positions, trying to volunteer or trying to get into those positions, just background check the finalists. And so don't try to put the whole pool through that background check. That costs you a lot of money. Screen current employees and current volunteers annually. That's another thing of who should we screen. Well, we know who we should screen, but we should screen them more than just when they start. And that's very important. We should be on an annual or every 2-year basis at a minimum, because don't forget, people can, have issues and not have been caught for them yet, and suddenly they get arrested after they've started volunteering. Or it's possible as well, most jurisdictions, if we're talking about law enforcement, until a person is convicted of a crime, they're not going to be put in the system, if you will, in any kind of a system that you're going to find through background checks. So they're still sitting in a system waiting for the courts to adjudicate their process or to come to a conclusion, convict them, and then that's when they typically get put into those systems. So, I could be a volunteer and I could have an issue outstanding in another state or even in your own town with the courts, but as I apply to volunteer, it's not in the system yet because I haven't been convicted. So you want to do checks every so often. And again, because maybe I just haven't been caught yet, and suddenly I'm caught after I become a volunteer. And I think you always have to, as far as who are we conducting background checks in and how are we doing those, I want to say several times during this discussion, we want to make sure we're doing those at a state and a national level as well. So if you're looking for what you should do, I do believe you should do those backgrounds. Pay enough that you're getting a state and a national, because people don't just commit crimes in their local areas, or they may have moved to your region from another state or another area of the nation. So, and also a side note, for those that are under 18, most of those records are going to be what they call sealed, or they're not going to be available if somebody's had an issue. So you may have to resort to reference checks, those kinds of things for those folks. And so keep that in mind. We do need these background checks in place as part of our process of protecting our people and our assets that are entrusted to us. And so don't forget, we may not find everything in a background check. I want to make sure and reinforce that a couple times here. So we still have to have these other systems in place, these 2-person check systems, those kind of things. How much should we invest? How much do they cost? How much should we invest in them? And my thought on how much you should do is it really depends on the position. Who are you screening? What position are they going to be working for? Obviously, if you have someone who might be driving children around, being around children brings in an important check itself. And then the driving folks around is another important check. So you need to look at what needs to be checked. Obviously, in that situation, you need to do a criminal history check at the state and the national level, and you need to do a motor vehicle driving record check and maybe even some references. And included in that, the references, go talk to, if they've come from other churches, or, I don't know who you might talk to, who you put on your application to be able to discuss things. And you're going to want a sex offender registration check in there as well. Are they required to register as a sex offender? Those kind of things. So now if you have let's say just an usher, you might just do a state and a national level screening just to look at the big stuff. If they're an adult, they're going to only be working with adults. They're going to be in the main auditorium. They're going to be supervised by someone and in view almost all the time. Then, a basic check at a state and a national level would probably work. And you don't need a driving record check if they're not going to be driving the church van or the church bus around, those kind of things. So, the costs do vary. If we look at the various costs in our ministry, those kind of things do vary. So, if we look at typically what we'll see is a basic screening request, a basic screening check with various background checking groups. There's different ones, lots of different ones. So I'm suggesting the first place to start is with your insurance company. Who do they recommend for background checks? And then maybe you shop around a little bit based on price. So the basic screening is probably going to run you somewhere between $8 and $20. And again, it can greatly vary as I look around the internet. So in this package, this is the basic package. So it'll typically include an identity check, verification type system, some sort of criminal record search, and a sex offender registration check as well. Then you get typically into the next category, which some might call it a plus type screening check, but it's the middle of the road kind of thing. And this is typically going to run you $15 to $40, somewhere in that region, just a little bit more. Includes the same stuff as the basic check. And, they'll do the criminal history, sex offender check. And then it typically is where we get into the adding a local and a national criminal history check. So, and I think that's important. You want to look locally, but you also want to look more nationally as well. And then we typically see the largest check packages. These can get really varied in cost. Starting at $20, going up to $70. And, they can have even special requests in them. So they're typically called advanced or all-inclusive, and they include the previous items that I mentioned and a motor vehicles records check typically is what's added to that process. So my recommendation is, you're looking for the appropriate check, the appropriate level specific to the position. As I mentioned a couple of examples earlier, what are they going to be doing within the ministry? And those are the things you need to check. If they're in a sensitive area, like working with your sensitive groups, children, and they're driving them around, then I think you need the whole package. Look for background check service that at a minimum checks for the person being registered sex offender, a criminal history check for your state, and the nation, your region and the nation as well. So I think that should be something, especially anybody that's working in a leadership position, working with money, or working with our children or special groups. Elderly, also I mentioned that earlier. If they're working with the elderly, we should be adding some extra checks there. Obviously, if you have somebody that's going to be working with, like I said, the money, the children, or you got to invest a little bit more money. That's the way I see it. And don't forget, we should be doing those annually, especially with the sensitive groups. I really don't see it these days as a one and done kind of thing. One-time check as they enter the ministry, and then you're done with them. I just don't see that these days. We've got to be a little bit more diligent with our work these days. So just having the screening process like I'm talking about may help deter some people from trying to get into the position as well. So sometimes when you hand somebody an application and say, fill this out and get it back to us, you may not ever see them again, or they don't turn the application in. You see them in the ministry or church, but they never give you that application back because they know you're going to find something. So that in itself, having a screening process just in place when you start passing out applications and stuff and telling people they're going to be screened, that may deter some folks as well. And I think people like to see that as well. If you're screening parents and other folks to do other parts of the ministry, I think they like to see that stuff, that you're being diligent in those areas. And I think it's important for your liabilities as well. I know your insurance companies would tell you that. And I'm not here to give you legal advice. I'm giving you my opinions. But, I think this is an important thing for us to be doing. And I really would recommend that you consider doing this as to the best of your ability. Only 38% of churches, according to that Barna study, are really doing well at doing the backgrounds, but I think you should be one of those 38%. You and I should be working to bump that percentage up, but you and I should be part of that group that regularly, especially in the sensitive areas, that's regularly looking to get these background checks done and then do them every so often as well. Once a year, recheck people, especially in specific positions, or every couple of years.
entertaining, educational,
content that improves your ministry. The Church Security Answer Man.
Now, I just want to do a little bit further discussion. We brought it up. I mentioned it a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the Texas church shooting, when we were reviewing that. I mentioned a tip line, a tip email, or having a team for contacting, for people that can contact them at the church, a team of folks or a tip line or email. You know, we discussed that during that discussion because there's information, there's evidence that, and it's been widely publicized, that this person, before committing this terrible act of violence against the church, was actually texting his intentions possibly to some of the members of the church that were relatives or some of the attendees. So, and I don't fault them. I don't hold that against them. But what I want to make sure and say is I see some other evidence of this where people in past violent situations know about this stuff. And so they become aware of somebody having a bad mental health issue, sometimes maybe even hear them being violent or threatening the church, those kind of things. And we might know this stuff ahead of time. And so those folks, those relatives, spouses, those kind of things who know that, I just would like to suggest that we have a place that they can send us a note or call us, and that we're going to support them. I think it should be staffed by people who are very good at communication, maybe even popular within the church, that people like them, so that they will call this person or talk to them in church or send them a note and let them know that there's something going on. We just had, in the Seattle, Washington area, we just had a few weeks ago here a Covington, Washington man that was arrested and took to mental health for evaluation, then lodged in jail because he was making threats against the church. And we had a recent one, I don't remember the city, that he was also calling and texting people and threatening a specific church, and with how he was going to do it and everything. And they took him for mental health evaluation. And they found he didn't have any weapons, as they believe, that he does not have any weapons or ability to carry that out, but they don't know for sure. But they took action. But how many people are not calling the police? Those circumstances were communicated to the police departments, but who's not calling the police? We already have one example we know from the Texas incident that no one called. And so, and again, I don't fault those folks, but I think you and I should set up an avenue. So I'm suggesting that we might consider having a way that this information can be directly reported to the church. People do not necessarily want to tell police. Sometimes they don't have the ability to tell police. And the police are pretty busy. Honestly, they're doing a great job, but they have a lot on their plates. So they can't necessarily look into every tip. But, you know, they try their best and they do a pretty good job. But maybe they might tell a trusted member of your security team, usher team, or you just create a team who's ready to take that information. You know, a violence tip line or a violence email, or, you know, people that can be directly contacted with information in the church. I do believe you'd also have to have a male and a female as part of that team, so that, you know, obviously if a female spouse becomes aware of this, she is not necessarily, nor would it be necessarily appropriate for her to call a male and begin talking to them about this stuff. So you need a female, I do believe, who can return these phone calls, emails, as well as the male as part of the process. And, you know, give them that opportunity. This information, tip line or email address, could be put in your bulletin, put on your website as well. You know, and these are my thoughts on the issue as I look at it from my background, from my law enforcement background. These are my thoughts. I am definitely thinking we need to get a little bit tougher on this issue. You know, I look at churches as similar to schools. And schools over the last few years, we've invested a lot to make them more safe. But the churches, we tend to be lagging behind. And I see us as just as vulnerable as the kids, really. And because of the dynamics, we may be even a little bit more vulnerable because we don't have people looking out for us sometimes. And so we need that. And schools are getting good at this, but we're not doing so good. We need to catch up just a little bit. So, you know, certainly you're going to get tips on other things. or you may get tips on violence or people who have mental health issues that do not have anything to do with the church. Those things would have to be passed on to the appropriate authorities, to police or other agencies. So certainly some of that's going to happen. But I think it might be a wise investment for us, a wise investment in volunteer time or whatever it takes to set this stuff up. And it appears sometimes people in our ministries, familiar with our ministries, may have an idea that a problem's brewing with someone around them. So, and that's what I'm saying is important. We need to toughen up our defenses. We need to not be called soft targets anymore as churches. We need to harden our buildings, those kind of things. And I'm not talking about hardening our hearts, but what I am talking about is making it more difficult, putting out some barriers out there for people to take advantage of us. So I think we need to give these people an avenue to let us know, and it needs to be an avenue that they're comfortable with as well. So some way for them to communicate with folks. And obviously it can't be through our pastoral staff. There's counseling, privacy laws, those kind of things out there. So it should not be a pastor, and we should keep them out of this process, and it should be other people within the ministry that do not have to do with counseling, those kind of things, so we don't get into some kind of conflict there. So that's it for this edition of the Church Security Answer Man. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining the community, and I hope you'll make some comments on this stuff. I'm always looking for your comments. Please make some comments. I'm hoping that they're supportive of others, giving some ideas. Let us know what else you want to hear about. Send me an email, captainjoepuckett@gmail.com. If you have some other things that you want to talk about, issues, something you have a question about, send those to me, and I'll probably also use them in our shows to help other people. Because if you have an issue, I'm sure many, many others in other ministries have that as well. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a safe and secure week.
Thanks for listening to the Church Security Answer Man podcast. Get more by joining us anytime at churchsecurityanswerman.com.